Hi, I'm Kalela Williams, and I'm back with my literary discussions. If you're like me, you were blown away by 22-year-old Amanda Gorman's poetry reading at the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Her poem, The Hill We Climb, was accessible and beautiful and fresh. So while there are some great curricula out there for sharing this with students in a classroom setting, I'm going to share a few writing prompts that might inspire your creative writing. I'll be showing these as poetry prompts, but they can translate into writing prose, whether that's fiction or memoir. So here we are with writing prompts inspired by Amanda Gorman's The Hill We Climb. You can find the whole poem online, but I've included an excerpt here, and I'll read a little bit of it. When the day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. And I'll stop right there, but give you a chance to read this excerpt. Amanda, of course, does a phenomenal job of reading, and I don't want to even try. But I do think it's helpful if you do this in a workshop setting to show the reading of her poem, of course, which you can find pretty much everywhere online, as well as the full text. So again, this is an excerpt, and we're going to do a little bit of a sort of a more complicated writing prompt. We're going to pick out words from her poems. And the way that I see her poem is that there's a few different types of words to me. There are words that speak to power, words that speak to vulnerability, and words that speak to marvel or wonder, you could say. So I picked out a few words from the excerpt, and power words were things like braved, weathered, ours, successor, vulnerability, lost, belly, broken, day, light, peace, dawn, for marvel or wonder. So I also tried to look at these words in another way. Could they connote something different? For instance, in the way that she used the word weathered, Amanda uses the word weathered in terms of somehow we've weathered and witnessed. So see, she's used weathered as a way to say withstanding something. So that, again, is a word of power, but could we use that as a word of vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera? So I tried to think about how words of power could be used for words of vulnerability, et cetera, et cetera. I'll show you an example of this, but you can see here, I actually like to visualize it. So I drew little lines and arrows. That's just how I did it. Of course, you can do any sort of diagram that you want, or you don't have to draw anything. So I wrote a poem that I took about 8 minutes to write this poem, and then I took another 5 minutes to mess around with the line breaks. So if you were doing this in a workshop setting, I would recommend that you allow about 8 minutes or so to do this. Because again, you don't want people to, with poetry prompts, you don't want to give people too much time. You want to give them just enough to write what they're feeling or thinking. So my poem is this. I'm weathered by loss. I'm peeling and shambled like the ramshackle house where my father once lived when it was new, when it smelled of sawdust and just hewn timber. Before I knew it, before I knew him, before he knew my mother, before she made three, my sister, my brother, and me. Her belly thrice round in black-lined, navel-punctuated beauty, and we, the successors of what was within that wallpapered belly of that once new home built by my father's hands, and she, the inheritor of braved flaws, the peace within her home, brick, and it too built by her father's hands, arising like a smell from what was left unsaid, undawned upon, for light reveals molecules of dust. I'll actually stay here for a minute. So again, I'm manipulating words like weathered. And here, in this case, weathered isn't used as a way to connote withstanding something. It's used as a way to connote being worn away, right? So it's used as I've taken it from a word of power into a word of vulnerability. Successors isn't something, it's not a successor of something grand or wonderful. It's, in this case, in this poem, it's a successor of something sad and shameful. Belly is used to suggest both beauty and new life, as well as a haven of secrets. And I tried to play with other words. So smell and dust, again, in one sense, they connote newness and freshness, and then in another sense, they connote staleness and secrets. And light and dawn are also used to foreground ideas of darkness and dirt. So this can also, I want to just repeat that this can also translate into any kind of writing, I might actually turn this into a piece of fiction, because when I wrote it, my sort of narrative brain took over. And although there's some elements of it that are biographical, most of it is fiction. And so I felt like, oh, I could turn this into something else. And this is a way that poetry can sort of inspire prose. I'm a big believer in that. So another simpler writing exercise that you can do is to simply ask folks to begin a poem with, when the day comes, we ask ourselves. We ask ourselves what? That's a great prompt just to begin a poem. Another really simple prompt is to write a poem in response to the question, for there is always light, if only what? For there is always light, if only what? And there's other lines within this poem that you can pick out as simple prompts to get folks writing. So thank you so much. These are just some simple things that you can do. And remember, when you borrow a line of text, so like, for instance, if you use those two prompts that I just mentioned, where you say, um, uh, when you actually borrow a line from Amanda's poem, do say after Amanda Gorman. So you title the poem, title, etc., after Amanda Gorman. So that's it. Thanks for joining me. Please tune in for the next time that I do a literary talk.